This is Rob Kilmer. If you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And that's what we're talking about today on You Defend It. Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. As always, callers and guests will need to take a position, be able to defend it with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. Callers and guests will be treated with complete respect. For my part, I will ask questions that matter and give people the opportunity to answer. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topic up for the next show. You can also visit my blog through the site. You can read my post and leave your own. And the lineup for the Sunday talk shows will now also be posted on Saturdays. Okay. A lot to go over with respect to the stimulus package and also what's been going on in the state government. And I have been following this, as you know, and we've been talking about it on this show. Governor Patterson put out a proposed budget that hurts everyone, and everyone is upset about it. And the issue is, what are they doing to resolve the problem? In New York, that problem is a $15 billion deficit. And I had suggested that the people who are affected by these cuts get together themselves and work out a solution and present it to the governor. As naive as that sounds, I would think that would be the smart thing to do. However, what's going on right now is what always goes on, what happens every single time there are proposed cuts anywhere. People go to the public and scream about it. And I think this time it's different because there just isn't any money, no matter how loud you scream. It won't matter. Either the money's there or it's not. This governor has determined that it's not, so you're not going to get the money. The issue is, what are you doing about the problem? Either you're part of the solution or you're part of the problem. And I would suggest that what's going on right now with New York's different constituencies and special interests is that they are part of the problem. I want to read quickly a couple articles, and these are actually from the Binghamton Press this week. First one, ads, tier hospitals to lose state aid. United Health Services, which runs Wilson Regional Medical Center and Binghamton General Hospital, stand to lose $5.57 million in state aid if Governor David A. Patterson's budget proposals are enacted. The two special interest groups launched TV and radio ads, warning of the dire consequences that would accompany Patterson's proposed health care cuts. Now, what do you suppose those ads cost? Any idea? I don't, but I assume it's a lot of money. I mean, you know that 90% of the money raised for campaigns for office in this country go to advertising. How do these people have money? I mean, if we're talking about a total of $5.57 million they stand to lose, would their time not be better spent working with other people who stand to lose money to work out a solution that everybody can live with? Instead, they are exasperating the problem by spending money. Think about this. They are spending money to fight losing money. And they're going to lose the money anyway. What has been accomplished? Nothing. More of the same. And I think there's a growing consensus in this country and in this state and in this county and in this city that we are where we are because of the same. It has been more of the same as long as I can remember. I mean, if ever tactics were tired, they are these. You don't like the proposed budget, you run ads. it's just unfathomable to me that in this time of dwindling money, that you would spend money to oppose losing money under circumstances where, at this time, you know you're going to lose the money, at least some of it. The other thing it does is that it pits certain interests against other interests. Bad for everyone. And on that note, here's a second article. Again, this week, Binghamton Press. State budget spurs upstate downstate debate. Upstate business groups say the state budget plan approved by state legislature this week may disproportionately hurt small businesses, particularly in upstate, at a time when the region is already reeling from job losses. The budget plan also revived criticism of an upstate-downstate divide when it comes to state policy because the state's top leaders in the legislature and Governor David A. Patterson reside in New York City. Moreover, the budget deal was cut behind closed doors Tuesday and hurried to the floor of the Senate and the Assembly just hours after the bills were printed. Upstate is very concerned about the fact that the three leaders are all from downstate, said Sandy Parker, president of the Rochester Business Alliance and a leader of the Unshackle Upstate pro-business groups. Can you think of anything more counterproductive, that's it for the article, than that? What on earth are you going to benefit, or what is the benefit? What can you achieve by pitting upstate versus downstate? What people don't like to talk about upstate is that when the economy is flush, a disproportionate share of the revenue for the state of New York comes from New York City, comes from Wall Street. When they're giving out $18 billion in bonuses, how much money do you think is really changing hands down there? Those are just the bonuses. And that money's taxed. When New York City does well, New York State does better. Upstate benefits tremendously from the revenue generated in New York City. Now, whatever problems there are, whatever mathematical issues there are, should be addressed mathematically, not by further driving the wedge between upstate and downstate New Yorkers. What is that? That is about the most childish and despicable way to go about resolving financial issues. Like there isn't enough animosity there already. And again, that argument, upstate versus downstate, won't solve a single problem. But it will get people mad. Probably not going to help us. And I'm from upstate. Last article, this is from February 5th, in the press. State unions reject pay concessions. Patterson sought to block raises to cut budget gap. A piece of Governor David A. Patterson's plan to plug a $13 billion budget deficit appeared to fall out Wednesday when union leaders opposed his ideas of scrapping a pay hike for state workers and having them work 5 days without pay. Well, I think that it's not likely you're going to have one group make a concession without the rest following suit. However, that begs the question of why we are doing things in this order. The union shouldn't be asked to make any concessions unless it's part of a broader package where everybody makes concessions. But know this, everybody's going to need to make concessions, including unions. This should be coordinated, this should be organized, this should involve everybody at the table, everybody who's affected by this budget, every special interest. I don't begrudge the special interests trying to protect their interests, but they need to do so in the context of reality, which is that there isn't any money. Sometimes you got to cut your losses. I am telling you the way this should be resolved is the special interests should meet amongst themselves. They should meet the unions, should be meeting with the hospital workers. Actually, they're one and the same, but with the Chamber of Commerce interests Everybody should be meeting. Everybody who's affected by this. The mental health people who are concerned. The education people who are... Everybody. They need to decide amongst themselves what they're willing to live with the understanding that that the meeting's not over till the budget gap has been closed. Then present that to the governor. You know what happens if you do that? You're part of the solution. You are the solution. When each individual interest goes off on their own in the media, spending money, which I just cannot, it's incredible to me. Spending money to oppose losing money, unless and until you embrace a broader approach, then we're going to go on as we've gone on, which has gotten us into this mess. Everybody fighting for themselves, nobody attempting to be part of the solution. And they are part of the problem. The state spends too much money. Everybody in the state, every citizen in New York thinks we are overtaxed. And from a statistical standpoint, we are. We're one of the highest taxed people in the country. There are other mitigating factors. We also have some of the lowest housing costs in the country, but that's another discussion. But nobody wants to, even though we pay more than anybody else, we still run a deficit. How can that be? That can only be because we spend too much money. Which means people are going to have to get used to the idea of receiving less money. And even in this crisis, even in these times of massive increases in unemployment, 9 banks have failed so far just this year. We're in the first week of February. People are not open to the idea of taking less yet. And that is a sad commentary on where this country is mentally when it comes to discipline, when it comes to reality, when it comes to anything other than an entitlement mentality. And I don't mean entitlements in the traditional sense, entitlement programs. I mean people in their individual minds believe they are entitled to certain things. Every group, business groups, everybody. One way or another, it's going to change. You're either going to be part of the answer or you're going to be part of the ongoing problem. We'll be back. You're listening to Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton on You Defend It. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. I wanted to talk this week, and I had expected to talk this week, about the stimulus package as it made its way through the Senate. It was passed. It was not passed. It was agreed to late last night, maybe early this morning. In fact, the most recent article I have on it is from 12:20 a.m. this morning. And I want to get to that in a second. I don't feel like I can really go through it because I don't know what's been passed. I don't know what specifically has been agreed to, and I don't want to speculate on it. There's enough of that going on. We talked about exactly what the House passed, and I suspect that by next week, my understanding is the vote is Tuesday on the Senate's version, and then, because it differs from the House version, there will be a reconciliation committee between the House and the Senate, and whatever emerges from there will be signed, or not signed if something drastic happens, by the President. But I do want to go through a couple brief articles, and this is more on the national issue, or issues. This February 6th, from the Chicago Tribune. Employers axe payrolls by most since 1974, jobless rate at 7.6% with more pain ahead. That's the headline. The nation lost nearly 600,000 jobs last month, the worst showing in a third of a century, as a vicious cycle of cutbacks by consumers forced ever more layoffs by beleaguered employers. The unemployment rate catapulted to 7.6%, the highest in 16 years, and seems headed for double digits. Some 3.6 million jobs have disappeared so far in a deepening recession, which is shaping up as the biggest job killer in the post-World War II period, and is raising pressure on President Barack Obama and Congress to agree quickly on a huge economic stimulus plan to stop the hemorrhaging. Okay, that's it for that article. And as you heard, I think I heard as I was setting up in here on the national news, 9 banks have already have failed in 2009. That's 5 weeks. That's almost 2 a week. That is, when I hear failed banks, I think of the Depression. I think of the 30s and people trying to get their money out before the bank's gone. It's certainly not at that level at all. However, the notion of banks failing consistently, that's pretty worrisome to me. The next article I have is that Reuters, I'll just read a little bit of it from around midnight. Democratic senators agreed on Friday to cut their hopes for a larger economic stimulus package and support an $800 billion compromise that would give President Barack Obama an important but narrow victory. With the United States in the grip of the worst economic crisis in more than 70 years, a report on Friday showed nearly 600,000 jobs were lost in January, Obama has demanded that a bill be put on his desk by February 16. After 5 days of negotiations, Democrats agreed to cut tens of billions of dollars to their earlier $937 billion proposal to trim what critics, mostly Republicans, called billions of dollars in unwarranted spending. The group announced the agreement was for $780 billion in spending and tax cuts, but aides said the total could be as much as $47 billion more because of tax incentives senators previously added to boost flagging home and auto sales. Okay. Last week, we got a break here in a couple minutes for Paul Harvey, or Paul Harvey Jr. Last week, I heavily criticized the Democrats over the stimulus package that made its way through the House. I had said and believe that they missed an enormous, perhaps historic opportunity to present a different type of Democratic Party to the nation. It's not often you have the nation's attention, you have it now. It's not just that people are losing jobs, it's that people we know are losing jobs. That's the difference. I have felt remarkably unaffected in upstate New York until recently. And I mean myself, what I mean is I haven't observed the calamity that I read about. But now I'm starting to. And it is a frightening thing. And when, as a collective, we are frightened or worried at this level, then you have our attention. That's your moment to shine. That's your moment to lead. And the package that made it through the House was not demonstrative of leadership. It was horrible. It was inexplicable. I mean, you couldn't relate it. You couldn't describe it in terms of a stimulus package, because on its face it would not stimulate anything other than rage from Republicans, and rightfully so. But it looks as if the package that has made it through the Senate is different. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about this, but it's not an $800 billion spending program or $780 billion. It's about 2/3 spending, 1/3 tax cuts. And last week, well, truth be told, I kind of went off on the spending end of it. And this week I want to talk about the tax aspect of it. I think if we're going to look at this, we should look at it as a whole. I think we should look at every part of it. And all the emphasis last week was on the Democrats and their spending. This week I want to talk about Republicans and their tax cutting. And I want to attempt to just change some fundamental assumptions we have about tax cuts and what their value is and what they mean and the underlying implicit promises in there that are never kept. And that's, if you're looking at a 100-yard field, we've got, I think the Republicans have plays designed to go 90 yards. And it's that last 10 that results in these massive deficits. And I don't think there's enough scrutiny placed on it, because the reality is we're left with this money that we owe. That's it. And we are told time and time again, well, trust us, this is what's going to happen. Cutting taxes accomplishes this. Cutting taxes results in that. And it may be true. However, not only is it not always true, but at the end, you still have to pay it back. And they don't. And we're going to talk about the consequences of that. I say it all the time, to try and just get the public to understand that deficits have somehow been attributed to spending, when they're really, in the most basic sense, attributable to borrowing. And we'll talk about that some more. Paul Harvey is up next. We'll be back after him. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. Last week I talked about the spending side of the stimulus package. And this week I want to talk about the tax cut side of it, and tax cuts in general, and what they have meant and not meant to the economy. Actually, I got Frank on the line. Frank, you there?
Good morning, Mr. Kilmer.
Morning, Frank. How are you?
Hey, I liked your phrase, inexplicable stimulus package. So what I'd like to talk about this morning is the philosophy and sort of the big picture. I think your last week's assessment and the one you went over today about the $1.2 trillion stimulus package, I think it was very fair and accurate. And I've thought about it for a week, and I think the big question is, why would Obama, who ran such a superb campaign, push such a horrible multi-billion-dollar spending in Port Boondoggle, which was supposed to create, jobs and infrastructure? And I thought about it, and I can think of like maybe 3 or 4 possibilities. So I'd just like to run them up the flagpole and see what you think.
Okay.
Number one is, Obama may be incompetent and dumb, and I don't think that's the case at all. I think he's pretty shrewd. Number two, he was blindsided by Pelosi and who's the budget director there? Obey.
David Obey?
Yeah, with the 600-page payoff to welfare people, unions, tree huggers, and so on. Maybe there's some truth to that. Another possibility, it was calculated to go down to defeat, to appease the far left, and then Obama could say, hey guys, I tried, but now we have to compromise. And, he's following exactly in the footsteps of Bill Clinton. If you recall, Bill Clinton did exactly the same thing with that $35 billion, which in those days was a lot of money, payoff to mainly his southern governors that supported him. And, that tells me that, Obama's delaying real fixes and playing with the economic disaster. And the last one is maybe this is mostly smoke and mirrors, just a grab for power. I'm not really satisfied with any of those.
Well, thanks for the call, Frank.
Yeah.
I think Obama's desperate to get something done. And I think he's going out of his way to be bipartisan and not to be as much on the attack as he could be, although he went to a Democratic retreat and sort of laid into the Republicans. But I think more than anything, he just wants to get something done, and I don't think that's going to help him. You know, he needs to advocate for what he ran on, not just look to have something to put on the wall as an achievement. I got this done in my first 100 days, a stimulus package, something we're going to call a stimulus package. I don't think he had much control over what happened in the House. And I actually think that there are these kind of built-in animosities. I don't think the House much likes the Senate. I don't think the House and Senate much like the presidency. And they particularly don't like a former senator who is president now telling the Senate or the House what to do. I believe that. I know that's petty, but I think they are petty. And I believe that. I don't think Barack Obama had any control over what Nancy Pelosi's people did in the House. I'm not sure Nancy Pelosi had any control over what her people did in the House. She should have had more. And if she had power, then she blew it. What came out of the House, what emerged from the House, was a disgrace. And it was a disgrace for the Democratic Party. After winning an election, after increasing their membership in the House and in the Senate, you know, when you got all three in the White House, then anything that happens is yours. You got to own it, because it is yours. And bipartisanship is nice and everything, but the Republicans, the reality is, they want the Democrats to own it. They don't want to be responsible for anything anymore. They don't have the power. Why should they have the responsibility? And you saw that in the House. Not a single Republican vote. Not one. In the Senate, there looks to be, this agreement is really this. 3 or 4 Republicans have agreed to vote for this thing on Tuesday. And that's enough. This, by the way, coming up here is another issue that I could go on for an entire week about. You know, somehow, somewhere along the line, the filibuster became the entire legislative agenda of the Republican Party. We now take it as a given that it takes 60 votes to get anything done in the Senate. 60 votes means you are overcoming the threat of a filibuster. The Republicans have thwarted in the Senate, I can't even count anymore, things that had more than 50 votes. But unless you have 60, you can't stop a filibuster. So with all the Democrats voting, with the exception of possibly one, and 3 or 4 Republicans in support of the stimulus package, that's the agreement that was reached last night. All the Democrats, 3 or 4 Republicans. Nearly all the Democrats. You know, you're just not going to get bipartisan consensus when it's not in the interest of the Republicans as a party to be part of something that they don't believe is going to necessarily work. And I'm not saying they want it to fail. I am saying if it does, they don't want to be responsible for it. So they're not going to vote for this thing that comes out of the Senate. And Obama, you know, he met with Republican senators. He met with the House Republicans. He met with the minority in both chambers. And what did he get out of it? Nothing. Not a single vote. So I think he needs to say, I'm willing to work with you if you're willing to work with me. If not, then I'm going to try and do what I said I was going to do in the campaign. This is what I believe will fix this country. Now, having said that, the thing that came out of the House, I mean, it's not designed to fix the country. It could not be. It's not money that's going to jobs or to construction projects or anything like that. So hopefully and I want to wrap this up because I want to get on to the tax cut portion of this. Between what came out of the House and what is going to come out of the Senate when those two bills are compromised out, Hopefully it'll look more like a stimulus package than what came out of the House. I think it has to. All right. I do feel compelled this week, after having gone so crazy about the House and what the Democrats passed out of the House, to talk about the tax cut side of this thing. Barack Obama said the other day, we cannot continue to go forward on the same policies that got us into this mess. And I agree with that when it comes to the tax side of it. We're talking about, one of the issues is extending Bush's tax cuts, making those tax cuts permanent. If that's the answer, then how did we get to this crisis point? I mean, those tax cuts are in place now. They've been in place for years. Weren't we supposed to be able to avoid this? Wasn't that supposed to strengthen our economy? Why would you talk about extending something that didn't prevent this crisis? Now, obviously, the crisis itself had its genesis in the banking sector. But, even prior to that, we did not have any type of economy like we had in the 90s. Now, love him or hate him, Bill Clinton came in, and in 1993 he raised taxes to address the fact that after 12 years of Republican presidents, we had a sky-high deficit. He lost Congress over it. Republicans took over in 1994, but with his budget in place, with his tax structure in place, we created more jobs in this country than we had under any other president ever, including Ronald Reagan, by the way. It's a myth. Ronald Reagan's presidency created more jobs than Bill Clinton's. 20 million plus under Bill Clinton created. The other issue on tax cuts that no one seems to recognize, or if they do, talk about, is that they have to be paid for also. A tax cut means, obviously, you are taking money out of the revenue stream that would come into the government's accounts. Well, you got to make that money up somehow. I got to take another break here, and when I come back, I want to talk about what I think is the myth of tax cuts. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying that Americans don't benefit when we have them. I am saying that the discussion that we've had about them over the years has left a few critical parts out, and I want to fill those in because they are very real. There are massive consequences as a result of these omissions, and we're dealing with them right now. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. Phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. All right, tax cuts. This is my gripe with tax cuts. We're always told that if you cut taxes, that will stimulate the economy. And sure, there will be a short-term deficit as you have to make up for the money lost due to the tax cuts. But the long-term benefits will outweigh those short-term deficits because more jobs will be created, there will be more tax revenue as a result, and the tax revenue that is created by the increased number of jobs will more than offset the deficits incurred by cutting the taxes. That is as succinctly as I can think to distill the Republican argument for tax cuts, and I think that's fair. However, what they leave out is this. Once those jobs have been created, if they are, and the revenue coming in from the new jobs exceeds the amount borrowed to fund the tax cuts, you have to pay it back. And they don't. Think about this. When George Bush ran for president in 2000, 12 of the last 20 years had been Republican presidencies. And as I've said on this show before, right now, 20 of the last 28 years have been Republicans in office and president. Each one of those years, the government spent more than it brought in. Every single year. And every single year that those Republican presidents were in office, the government spent more than it did the year before. So this notion that Republicans are the party of restraint is a complete myth. What is the restraint? They don't restrain themselves on spending. They just are able to restrain themselves from paying for it. I don't know where that became such a laudable thing. I have never understood it. I got time for one more call here, and then I want to finish up this point. Paul, are you there?
Yes, sir. Hi, Rob. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Hey, Rob, I think your statement about the tax cuts have to be paid for, I think that's a myth. And here's why I say that. That presumes that government can never be smaller. You know, that what we spend today, and they always spend more, of course, as you know, and I know,
right.
That they have to be paid for. The government can never shrink or be reduced, etc. And the freest economy in the world is rated by the Wall Street Journal for as long as I've been following it is Hong Kong. We're about 6th or 7th on that list, and it's a composite, you know, of taxes and regulations, etc. And typically in Hong Kong, they take 20 cents on the dollar for taxes total, and that's it. And that's so people have 80% of what they earn to spend.
Right.
And it's a very good formula. Milton Friedman estimates that the average American family here of 4 will work 2.5 days a week for the government.
Out of a 5-day week?
Yeah. Taxes and regulations. 2.5 days a week. So my favorite question to everybody is, how many days a week do you want to work for the government? And I think our generation, I'm younger than you, I'm 67, but we've been brainwashed.
I'm 44.
You're just a kid. Rob, we've been brainwashed to think that, you know, that the government's going to crumble, the United States is going to blow away if we don't spend 40 and 50% of what we make on taxes. It's ludicrous. And we got a long way to go, especially here in New York State. I'm a native of this area, as I assume you are.
Yes.
And I think we have the worst government in America. They can't get enough of our money.
I agree.
And so we need a tax revolt.
Well, let me ask you this, Paul. Has there been anything you've seen in the last 20 or 30 years that leads you to believe that it is likely that our federal government will spend less money in any year going forward than they did the year before?
No, zero.
Right, and that's my point.
Unless and Rob, it's a fact. It's not even, it's nobody's opinion. It's a literal fact. But what's happening, of course, in this country is apathy. We become spoiled,
right.
Soft, irresponsible. We don't teach American history, I don't think, like we used to. And I think you could ask a lot of 25-year-olds about the Vietnam War. They would look at you with a what are you talking about? You know, or the Korean War. So we just got to do a better job. And I think it's part of patriotism is to care. And it will only happen if we do it, you know, from the ground up. So
I could not agree with you more. Let me ask you this.
I am part of a new organization, by the way, too, Rob. We're going to do some of these things locally.
Why is it that the first conversation that kids have about finances is when they get their first checkbook, when they're 16 or 18? I think kids should be taught finance in middle school to start understanding
I think that's
a concept
sure.
that is going to have a massive impact on their lives for the rest of their lives.
Sure, and taxation.
Right.
Yeah. Now,
just remedial, just a fundamental understanding of it.
Because it's our money.
And it controls their lives when they're adults.
Exactly, it's our money. And I think the stimulus package that you're talking about is, we're in this problem because we've borrowed and spent too much money. Now we're going to do the same thing again, as if that's the solution. But
I agree.
We hire politicians to spend our money is really probably one of the most important jobs they have. And of course, because we're irresponsible as individuals, and we don't participate, and we don't pay attention, we don't speak up, et cetera, et cetera. Hey, Rob, can I give a plug to an organization that I'm joining here or a part of?
As long as it doesn't have profanity in its name or anything like that.
How about
I think
this
it
one?
can.
Here's how crazy we are. Citizens for a Better Broom. And we're a newly formed organization. I had a tax revolt a couple of months ago at one of the Legions here in town, and this is an offshoot of that. And we've got just a small nucleus of concerned citizens, stakeholders, and our objectives in Broome County are one government, one school district, and cut taxes by 50%. And that's what we have to do to compete with the growth states. Because the growth states, Texas, Virginia, North Carolina, they spend about half as much on government as we do.
Right, and most of the kids I went to high school with are there.
Sure, they're there because there's opportunity, there's prosperity. So,
I gotta let you go. There's a couple things I want to finish up before
thanks, Rob.
9.
Good
Hey,
luck.
thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks for calling.
Bye.
With respect to the tax cuts, when George Bush ran in 2000, there was a $5-point-some-odd trillion surplus projected. Now, I will qualify that with projected. Nobody knows what would have happened. However, if the argument that supports tax cuts that has been pushed by the Republican Party since Ronald Reagan, in order to carry that through to its logical and promised conclusion, the argument in 2000 by the Republican Party should have been, see, Reagan's tax cuts, which weren't completely repealed by Bill Clinton, he raised them but not passed Reagan's rates, resulted in a thriving economy, in increased tax revenue, so that we can do what we said we were going to do, which is pay back the money we borrowed to fund this approach. They didn't do it. To the contrary, he said, well, if there's a surplus, then hard-working Americans deserve a tax cut. They did not make good on the promise, the ultimate promise, that is the foundation of their entire theory, which is, if you cut taxes, you will suffer a short-term deficit to make up for the lost revenue, but in the long term, there will be enough money to pay it back. They didn't pay it back. They never have. That's why we had a $5 trillion deficit in 2000 and an $11 trillion deficit now. The economy was moving just fine. Well, it was actually on its way into a mild recession when George Bush took office. But that discussion back then should have been about, all right, it worked. We can pay the money back now. And not only did the Republicans not make that argument, but to their eternal shame, neither did the Democrats. And that's because nobody wants to tell Americans they're not getting a tax cut. Even when the evidence in front of you, even when the facts you are faced with are so lopsided as to make it the only logical thing to say, nobody will say it. You know, as the Democrats, in my view, in the House blew it with the stimulus, the Republicans blew it in 2000. They could have, for all time, been able to hold up this example by saying, Ronald Reagan cut taxes over the next 20 years. Those taxes weren't fully repealed, and they created so many jobs we paid the whole deficit back. That's the way it's supposed to work. They didn't do it. Okay, I'm just about out of time. Thank you for listening to You Defend It, and please visit my website, www.youdefendit.com. We will be back next week, and I will get the topic up by next Friday on what we're going to be going over. I'm Rob Kilmer. We will see you next week.